Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome to the show. Tonight we have two special guests on the show because Brandon is away and was not able to make this taping, but we pulled out of episode 11, Sean O'Neill, who's a good friend of the show, good friend of mine, who's of One Performance, of course, if you follow him on social media, is a teacher and mental performance coach in New York. And Sean, we're really thankful that you stepped up. Next man up mentality, right?
Absolutely glad to be here. I feel like this is like Saturday Night Live. I was a player, and now I'm coming back as a host.
That's right. Yeah, you never know. Next week, it's going to be the Sean O'Neill podcast. Be on the lookout for it. Yeah. No, this is great. We're thankful to have you with us, and thankful for our guest tonight. We have Bryan Schor, who some people may know that name because he was a quarterback at James Madison University, had a wonderful career there, finished his 4-year JMU career as the program's all-time leader in career passing touchdowns, completions, total offense. I mean, you name it, he did it. He guided JMU to, listen to this, a 28-2 record in his 2 full seasons as a starter, which included a pair of trips to the national championship game that was out in Frisco, and won one of the titles in 2016. Not a bad career, right?
Unbelievable. This young man has the it factor.
Yes.
It was a pleasure to talk to him and to listen and learn from him.
Yeah. And you can tell just in the steadiness, just of his answers. I mean, I felt like there was times where, we're asking questions. I'm thinking, man, this might be one of those that would most of our guests might take him a few minutes to really dive in and think about something. But he just was just the way he was as a quarterback, very steady. Just
a lot of confidence,
knows what he's talking about, and continuing to learn. And the listeners will hear that. I mean, here's somebody who, like you said, leaders are learners, and he's somebody who's always looking to get better and has that growth mindset, even as a coach now, which was really cool. So I meant to mention that he's now actually an offensive assistant coach at East Carolina University. So really anxious to for the listeners to hear Bryan. And Sean, thanks again for joining us at last minute notice too. I think you found out yesterday, or maybe even this morning.
This morning, I can't remember. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for the time zone difference.
That's exactly right. Well, thanks, man. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk to you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, John.
All right. Enjoy Bryan Schor, everyone. Well, Sean, we're you get the great opportunity that in your first show guest hosting on the Mental Advantage podcast, you get a one of the top-notch guests right off the bat, Bryan Schor, who I've actually known for a little while because my son actually played football at JMU with Bryan, came in actually a year after Bryan got there. But I've actually been around Bryan a few times and have known him for a little while now. And I'm really excited for this conversation. So I think you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick Google search of him, and you can see he has the it factor, which is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I know with your schedule at ECU now, it's probably pretty busy, but we can't thank you enough for joining us. I like I told you on the phone, I really think this is going to be an opportunity for a lot of young players, young coaches to hear from somebody like yourself who's played at that level and then also is now coaching at that level.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm right in the middle of camp week right now, so if I doze off or anything, that's just get me right back on track. But yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Absolutely. So take me back, if you would, Bryan. We don't need to go all the way back to, any games you remember playing at Delaware Valley or anything like that, but just what was that experience like from a recruiting standpoint, kind of coming out of there and making that decision to decide, okay, I know I can play at the next level, take us through that journey.
Well, if you've ever been to Milford, Pennsylvania, you could probably understand that it's not a spot that, gets heavily recruited. It's 2 hours from New York City, 3 hours from Philly. My high school itself is like 45 minutes from the closest high school. So now looking at from a coach's point of view, if you're going to visit that school, that's the only school you can really hit that day. So I wasn't heavily recruited out of high school. I ended up driving to a camp in Miami, Ohio, and the coaches really liked me there. And I left that camp and I got a phone call about 45 minutes down the road, and the coaches offered me there. So I got Miami, Ohio. Fast forward into my senior year. I'm playing really well my first 3 games. I thought a Rutgers offer might come, ended up not coming. I felt good. So I committed to Miami, Ohio. It's where I wanted to be. Fast forward a couple more months and my head coach got fired. So Don Trebo gets fired at Miami, Ohio. Chuck Martin comes in, tells me I still have a scholarship. A couple months goes by, he kind of, stopped answering my phone calls as much. I kind of figured out like this isn't where I should go. And so I enrolled in Lackawanna Junior College. Mark Duda set that up for me, the head coach there. And, things went really well. I really only did the spring there, and I picked up Towson and JMU pretty fast. And once I visited JMU, I was kind of like, all right, well, this is home. And the junior college can be pretty rough too. So I was pretty excited to get on to my first 4-year school.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to an interview you did. Now, this is going way back. This kind of research we do here at the Mental Advantage podcast, but you had done a show on the John Mandola show. I don't know if you'd even remember this. It was like in 2014. And you were talking about that. And you said, sometimes in life, you just have to buckle down and get through it. And you took all the negative things in life and just clean slate and move forward. Talking about that transition from Lackawanna to JMU. And I think you had even mentioned that you'd sent out some communications and, JMU gets back to you. And I loved what you said. There was an offer that was made. I hope a lot of the high school athletes understand this. There was an offer made when you had visited JMU, and you said to yourself, what am I waiting for? Basically, it's like, why am I going to just go and like wait longer when I know this is probably the school I'm going to go to? But I think a lot of times players just kind of wait, and they're always thinking about what else might be out there. Maybe I'll get something bigger. Maybe I'll get something better. And you were like, hey, this is a great spot.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel for guys nowadays because, it's always the pressure of not knowing, maybe you feel really good about something, but maybe something else would feel better. And it's just, I think the younger generations often, have issues with being indecisive or anything like that. But I think when you do kind of know, and, don't second guess yourself on those things. Like if you feel that strongly about something, anything that comes up, you'll be able to make it work, and you'll be happy there.
Yeah. The other thing that really impressed me in listening to that interview was, and I will say this about you, having watched you kind of through your playing career, what always struck me, and I was telling Sean about this a little bit before you joined us, was you always seemed like you were a couple years or so above where you were, like just from a mental standpoint, seemed like you had it pretty well together, whether that was dealing with other players, dealing with parents, dealing with the media. But one of the things that I thought was a real mature outlook that you demonstrated in this interview was in 2014 would have been right when you got to JMU. And I believe probably Vad was there. I can't remember what other quarterbacks would have been in the room, but you were talking about how, when you got there, you were like, hey, great. I know I'm going to be in a competition here. There's another kid that's transferred in. Let's go. That's kind of that mentality you have to have as a quarterback, because every year as a quarterback, there's a competition. It's probably one of those positions that you're always dealing with something, right? Everybody's always like fighting to get that spot. How did you manage through that mindset, and where'd that come from? Just that welcoming the competition piece of it?
Well, when I first got to JMU, not a lot of people know this, but I struggled pretty mightily my freshman and even into my sophomore year. And I didn't have to compete much in high school. I was just fortunate to be more talented than the guys on our roster. And I'd fought through junior college and finally got my shot. And then the big thing is, you're right, when you do get to that school, nobody cares that you fought really hard through junior college and you didn't get this scholarship, and now you're here. All that stuff's great, but nobody cares. That doesn't matter. Am I going to tell Vad Lee, hey, well, I fought through junior college, I should be the starter? Well, no, you can't complete a pass, so you're not going to be a starter. So I did struggle when I first got to college, and one thing that really helped me was just realizing you're not in competition with the person standing next to you. It may look that way because you guys are on the same field doing the same things, but really you're in competition versus yourself. If he throws a bad pass and you throw a good pass, that's not now you're the starting quarterback. That's not how it works. So trying to get caught up in those things is it's distracting for a player, but it's also misleading. You think, oh, you had one good day, and it's well, you threw 3 good passes when he threw, 2 bad passes, whatever. If you only threw 2 bad passes and you threw 6, things just don't add up like that. So trying to focus on those things just as a player, just, not beneficial to you. The only thing you can work on is improving yourself. And there was actually a point when I was in a quarterback competition that I didn't watch just the other quarterbacks. Mainly the one that I was going up against. I just didn't watch his reps because I was I don't want to see what he's doing and then think that I have to react to that in some way, because it really doesn't matter. So I just said, oh, whatever, I'm just not going to watch him.
Yeah, that's such as mental performance coaches, Sean and I are both, you can tell, just giddy over that response, because it's such a high level response for someone at that age. I mean, because you're exactly right. Having the wherewithal and the knowledge to be able to say, hey, I got to commit to the process here. I can't get so outcomes focused. Brian Kane, who trained Sean and I in mental performance coaching, talks about the idea that as soon as you relinquish that thing that you're trying so hard to get, the better you increase your chances of actually attaining it, because you're no longer so results focused or future focused that you're actually just out into what's going on. So really kudos to you. Pretty smart to even be thinking about, I love the idea of I'm not even going to watch their reps, because you're right. It now all of a sudden you're in that comparison mode, and we know what happens when that starts becoming the case. Sean, you had something you were going to add?
Yeah. Was this something that you just kind of figured out on your own, or did you have coaches in the room kind of explaining this to you about, you're in charge of your process, don't worry about things that you can't control? Did you just figure this out, or was there voices in your ear kind of explaining this to you as you go along?
So it's pretty funny, actually. I think one of the things that was pivotal for me, and there's probably 2 things. One thing was Jamal Powell, who was our offensive line coach. He saw me working out one day in the summer, and I was just really getting after it, working on my drops, working on different things, and I was out in the field for a while. And Jamal kind of came to me and was like, listen, you only worry about being the best you can possibly be. Don't worry about anyone else coming in and getting something they shouldn't deserve or anything like that. He was like, I will make sure that doesn't happen. He said, I'll stand on the table for you. I will make sure that doesn't happen. You just worry about you. And the second thing was, when we first found out that we were going to get a transfer from South Carolina, I was kind of thinking, well, I better find a spot to go, because if he comes in here, he's going to be the guy. And I had mentioned that, walking out of the facility one time to Jonathan Klushman, and he kind of just set me straight. He was like, listen, I don't want to hear all that shit.
Yeah.
The best player is going to play. That's it. End of conversation.
Yeah.
And we didn't talk about that exact conversation until literally the day after we won the national championship. He had said, he went on this, long thing for Clue. It was probably 15 words, but he was like, man, like you came so far. I'm so proud of you. I didn't want to say anything to you this whole time because I was afraid I was going to, screw it up. But I think that's one thing that's been, beneficial is, having people that'll tell you hard truths. You're always going to have pressure. You're always going to have adversity. Have somebody in your corner that's going to say, hey, this is this. You're going to have to deal with that. Get over it.
Yeah, I love that. And it is so true. I mean, I think especially coming through, and I keep referring to it as that quarterback position, but it really is. It's like just as a college athlete in general, every year they're recruiting people that potentially could be the next you, or be taking your spot. So it's always just that cycle of competition. So it's really good. And to your point, having somebody like Clue say, hey, man, look, just go out and take care of you. Do what you have to do, because I forgot about that with South Carolina. It's like you had somebody else. It's like every year they're bringing another transfer or something like that. So now all of a sudden, you mentioned the national championship. You guys, when you take over that starting role, you guys kind of go on a roll because you had played some games. I guess it would have been your sophomore year, got into some games in your junior year. You're a starter, senior year starter. And really, that's when you guys made a huge shift as a program. Was there any cultural things? We talk about the importance of culture all the time. Was there any cultural or mindset changes you felt like were around the program that made a difference between a team that went pretty good in the playoffs the previous year, but not as far as going twice to the national championship in your last 2 years?
Yeah, I think one thing is, losing against Colgate in the playoffs was actually pretty good for us. To go the whole summer and kind of have that pain of, losing a game that you thought you were going to win and having it be the last game of the year. So you were just sitting up thinking about it, every single day. I think that was big. That definitely, weighed into, the summer training and this, and, why are we working so hard? Yeah. So we don't get beat. Yeah. But, I think like noticing the culture shift, it would probably be like, in the locker room. I think that's probably like the number one spot where, culture develops. And, it's something that coaches really can't have that big of a, impact on. It's something that needs to come from, it needs to be, player created, player led. And that just comes from, putting the right personalities, all into one big room and then just giving them the freedom of, creating that culture. And that's something that Coach Houston was really good at was, he stayed out of the locker room. That was kind of our spot. And, we spent so much time together that we kind of just developed that culture. And I think, eventually we just got used to winning. And so it was something that, it was expected, after we won the championship my junior year. And then, the way we got back, we still talk about it today is, it's hard to beat a team who thinks that they're going to win. And there were a lot of games that, we probably shouldn't have won. If I was watching them in the stands, I probably would have been, really nervous about them. But having played in them, I was pretty confident in just about every game that we were going to win. Now, Weber State, the one year I was like, oh, geez, we better pick it up because that one was getting close. But yeah, I don't know if I can pinpoint the exact, time that started. And I think it was probably many different
moments.
Times where, many different moments where like culture kind of began to create itself. But I think one way you can recognize it is, is there originality to it? And the one thing about us was we were saying things and doing things and all of them were brand new. They weren't, well, we're doing this because this team does this or this because this team does that. It was everybody, in the locker room was bringing something to the table. And, sometimes we ran with this new slang that somebody made up and sometimes we didn't. We ended up with some new dance that some guy in our team created. And we started doing that after every time we won. And the whole team, 50 people plus, we were all in on it. So yeah, I think originality is important for culture.
I think it's very interesting. You talk about the coaches gave you the locker room, which I think is awesome. Did they give you kind of expectations outside of the locker room? Like Urban Meyer always talks about above the line and below the line behaviors. So did they give you that on the field, in the meeting rooms and things like that? What's expected of an athlete here? And then you guys, like you said, you kind of originated your own spin on it in the locker room. Was that part of it?
So having two different head coaches, which, Everett Withers did have a great impact on my career as well. We did have core values, which Everett Withers, it's built into my brain right now. Honesty, treat women with respect, no drugs, no stealing, no weapons. We could repeat it 100 times. So there were different frameworks of, who we were going to be and this is under both coaches. But there wasn't the locker room, I wouldn't say didn't follow that, but it was separate from that. We knew that no coaches were going to be in the locker room. So the things that went in down in the locker room, the things that went on, they were, solely ours. And that's where, we really created our culture. And, we did have a push in the right direction from what we wanted to be, and why we were working so hard, and those things that were constantly reminded to us. And I think that's probably something that definitely helped us was, they're pushing us in the right direction, and then they give us free time. And then, the players have to lead that part of it. Player-led teams are, the most successful teams. If coaches have to constantly tell you where you should be, what you should be doing, what kind of work ethic they expect, there's just no way you're going to have the success that you have if you have player-led teams, because, like we said, when we're not there, we have to have players that are going to reinforce the same values that we want.
Yeah, it's interesting too, Bryan, that one of the things, because you're spot on, we just had this conversation about player-led teams a couple of weeks ago on the show. And one of the things too is giving the empowering. When a coach comes in and empowers you, one of the things Coach Mike Houston did when he came over was do your job. That was the thing he preached a lot to you guys, was do your job. Don't worry about what somebody else is doing. You do your job. And if everyone just commits to doing their job, then you're going to be a lot better off in the long run. And speaking of those player-driven teams, that was one of the things that I think I observed in you, and I know a lot of your teammates observed in you, is that leadership. And it was you and, Aaron Stinney and Jordan Brown. There was a lot of people who were part of that core, and Clue, a lot of guys that were part of that. But one of the things in preparation for this, I reached out to a couple of players and was like, what was it about Bryan? What were some of the things? And, Riley Stapleton said, Schor led in the right way, passion, selflessness, and grit. Trey Sharp said Schor was an amazing leader that always put the team first. So you put impact on a lot of other players. I was telling one of my co-hosts, Brandon, that, Mac, my son, to this day still has you in his phone as QB1. I mean, that's not a knock on Ben DiNucci or any of the other guys that came, but you have to earn that respect. So that's the credit, I think, goes to a lot of you guys that were leaders of those teams, is you earned that. You and you did it because you showed up and you did your job. You did all the things in training that you needed to do. You weren't, if nobody was looking for you at 6:30 in the morning or 6 o'clock, if you all were having workouts, you guys were there.
Right. And yeah, one thing in coaching the position now, it's a really effective tool if you can have the quarterback of your team also be a selfless guy. And in that regard, I just mean that, the quarterback's going to get a ton of attention. It is what it is. They're going to get more credit than they deserve. They're going to get more blame than they deserve. But when things are going well and they're getting a ton of credit, if they can deflect that and push it off to the rest of the team, it can be really beneficial for your culture. And that's something I, recognize, because, I had a meeting with Coach Houston, and he said those exact things to me was, hey, you and I are going to get more credit than we deserve if we win. We're going to get a lot more blame than we deserve if we lose. And, I think I went home that day and then thought about that, and just about how, I've seen guys in the past, and not really guys, not quarterbacks that were on my team, but, kind of make it about them. And I don't know, that was just something that always bothered me. If you're going to have success, why do it alone? Yeah. It's a lot more fun to share it with other people. And, if you can bring the offensive line in and, in different skill positions, it'll be a lot more fun for you. But if you can then, impact somebody else with that and bring somebody on board with how you're doing it, then you can have an entire group of people who are selfless and who don't care who get the credit for something. And, when you have a group like that, you're set up really well for success because you're solely doing, everyone's doing their own job, but no one's carrying that, I want to get the credit for this, or I want to get the credit for that. That leads to, a wide receiver blocking a guy 40 yards downfield, and, the running back's able to score a touchdown,
That's right.
And so it's really hard to measure those different things, but it's kind of one of those things that when a team has it, it. And, we had it in 2016, and, it's pretty funny when Rashard Davis was on the Eagles the year that they won the Super Bowl. I was just watching stuff in their locker room and, reading the different things that guys were saying to the press. And I texted Rashard and I was like, wow, like you guys have it. And I was like, I guess I only see it because, the year that we had it, but like you guys have it. This is incredible. And that was, like week 2 of the playoffs. So they still had a couple more games to go. Obviously won a Super Bowl that year.
Yeah. And you recognize it, and it's interesting what you're saying there, because one of the things Riley said in his quote was he helped everyone regardless of age or status. So to your point, it doesn't matter what, if you're third string or you're on scout team or whatever, if you have that quarterback in the room who's doing that, then I think that's one of those things. And, as Sean says all the time, a success leaves clues. It's, the other thing about it is, I think as a fan at that time, watching you guys go through that, for me, that turning moment when you talk about it factor was when you guys go into the Fargo Dome, you take care of business there. Now, all of a sudden you're like, well, we can beat anybody because this was supposed to be Goliath, right? This was supposed to be. But the great thing about you guys is you didn't look at yourselves as David. You looked at yourselves as, that's another team we're going to be playing on the schedule. And in order to get to Frisco and achieve the things we need to achieve, this just happens to be the next team on the schedule. So I think having that mindset's a really big deal as well. So how have you looked at, you mentioned, kind of as you're trying to work with your players now, what are some of the things that you have taken from those, highs, all the highs and some of the lows, some of the challenges that you had to face as a college player? How have you started to use that as a coach now? What are some of the things that you are doing on a daily basis that, you find like, oh, okay, this is because I went through some of those experiences?
I think I found myself doing it, pretty often. I think one thing that, stands out to me is, since I've graduated, I've tried to do, a bit more reading. One thing I've noticed is I like the books that agree with me, meaning that like, I'll read books and sometimes I realize like, I've already thought this, but this book is, kind of reiterating what I have to say, like the way I feel. And one of them, I read a pretty good book about adversity. And, the one thing that kept coming back to is, the way that you overcome adversity is you decide like what you care about more than adversity. And that is like, for me, it was, winning a national championship or, winning the game or, doing the best for my teammates. And those are the 3 things I really cared about. So anything that came, in conflict with those things, I didn't really put much thought into. It was just something I had to then overcome. And another thing I've heard, which I really like, is the hardest part about overcoming adversity is just deciding that you're going to. So just making that decision that, all right, I'm going to overcome this is the hardest part. Because once you get into, once you've already decided I'm going to get through this, then it just becomes, all right, I'm solving problems as they come. I'm solving problems as they come. And a lot of times I think I see guys who just, they weigh on the adversity so much versus just making the decision and getting through it. And so those are the 2 things I try and tell our guys more of is, hey man, like if you care about this thing that much, then what is a sprained ankle that you have to do rehab or, what is a minor setback that you have to go and then fix and then get through. And I think it's helped them. And, I think it's something I'll probably continue to do in the future and probably try and find more, useful ways to help them out.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool thought, because there's a strategy of, when you're dealing and processing with the thoughts in your head, you ask yourself the question, is this getting me closer to my goal or getting it further away from my goal? And when you simplify just that dichotomy, the two choices, is this getting me closer or is it getting me farther away? It becomes very simple to process that and go, all right, the decision's made for me. Do you find that the college athletes are able to kind of just make a simple choice like that? Or do you think a lot of other stuff gets weighed in on them?
I think it's different, athlete to athlete. There are some times where I'm just like, man, if you just decided that you were going to do it, it would have been so much less of a headache for you. And that comes from getting the vaccine is one of those things. I'm not going to get the vaccine, or I'm not going to do this. And then they spend so much time, going through all of that. And then at the end of the day, they ended up, getting it. And I'm just like, man, if you just went and got that thing right away, and you wouldn't have had to deal with everyone talking to you for, 4 or 5 days. Now the vaccine is it's almost a political issue nowadays. So it's a little different, but just things that they kind of stick their, nose up to it first. And then eventually they come around and, get back on track with it is, college athletes nowadays. And, forever I've always been, they're a little stubborn. And it can be an issue with adversity as well as, oh man, now this huge thing just got dropped down on me. And it's, how am I going to get through this? And they make it a bigger deal than it is. And, if you just decide, all right, well, do I care about that as much as I care about this? No, I don't. So that means it's just an obstacle that I have to overcome.
Yeah, it's funny, Bryan. I was just having a conversation with someone the other day to your point about college athletes being stubborn. I think it's just probably a lot of even around that age group. And I say to people, it's okay. We've being stubborn is not a bad thing necessarily if you're stubborn about the right things. Like, why don't you be stubborn about working hard? Be stubborn about being the first one to workouts in the mornings. Be stubborn about staying late after practice to get extra reps in or whatever. Like, stubborn's not a bad thing in and of itself. It's where we associate that with, if you're being stubborn about all the wrong things, it can be an issue, because sometimes that stubbornness, when channeled the right way, can be really, really effective for players. So talk to me a little bit about confidence, because, I know Sean and I, we're always dealing with the college athletes that we deal with. It's confidence is one of those big things. You mentioned dealing with adversity earlier, but I feel like there's this thing when I ask, players to give a self-assessment of what's one of their biggest challenges. The thing that they always say is, I just lack confidence. I don't know how to do it. Are there things that you've been able to help some of the players with as it relates to gaining more confidence, or how do you all usually address that?
All right. So there's one thing that I love when it comes to confidence, and, it comes from Kobe Bryant, and it comes from, a number of years back. And, I've admired Kobe Bryant. He wasn't, my favorite player growing up or anything like that. But, I remember growing up and thinking like, damn, like Kobe shoots every shot. Like Kobe's a ball hog, blah, blah, blah. And, I watched an interview with Kobe, and he's talking about confidence, and he's actually talking about, he got into it with a guy on his team. He shot the ball with 3 people on him and didn't pass it to the guy who, was open for a 3 or something like that. And, Kobe, I guess, had a conversation with the guy and said, the guy asked him, you thought you had a better chance of making that shot? And he said, yeah, that's what I thought. And so Kobe continues going on, and he says, and this is what's always stuck with me, is confidence comes from the preparation. And so it wasn't that, he just thought that he was so much better than everybody else. It came from the point of he had put in so much more work than everybody else on the floor. And because he had done that, he felt confident in taking those shots. And so when it comes to, a quarterback, and especially with college athletes, this is something that I'm taking from Chris Long, but he said a couple of weeks ago on a podcast, athletes are insecure. And, it's a real thing. You go through a sport and you're constantly looking over your shoulder and seeing who's coming up behind you. And, is someone going to take my spot? And how do I do everything I can to not have someone take my spot? So by nature and by the system that, coaches and the rest of us have created, we've made these people insecure. And the confidence piece coming from preparation is something that I use in college that helped me a ton. And I kind of put together a routine for my game week. And I knew that, whatever I did this week, I've outworked everybody else in the field. And so that's what kind of gave me my edge was, I was able to come up to center and, look out at the defense and be confident that, nobody else in the field had worked like I did. Like, I know you guys had studied my plays, but, I put in all of the work. I know every defense you're going to run. You can't run anything that's going to surprise me.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of what allows a quarterback to see, you often hear like, all right, the game is beginning to slow down for this guy, second, third year in the NFL guys will say that. And that's more of it than anything is, they've got into their routine and they've seen these things that, other defenses are going to do. And so now they can stand there and look at the defense and be like, all right, I'm prepared for this. And so that's the big thing that I've kind of preached into our guys is, confidence comes from the preparation.
Now, I think that's so good because you hit it on the head as far as the game slowing down. I think it also allows them to be more resilient when it comes to making mistakes. If you throw an interception or you throw it set, when you have that confidence and realize that's going to happen. But that last play, to borrow Trevor Moab's, from his book, It Takes What It Takes, where he works with Russell Wilson and says, let's acknowledge that last play happened, but it has no bearing or impact on what's going to happen on the next play. Like you have to have that neutral thought where you can say, okay, that happened. It's fine, but it's not going to dictate what's going to happen on this next play. And so I think that confidence allows those players to be better play to play. Whereas probably you might even admit yourself a little bit, because I think a lot of young players go through this, is it's hard when you make a mistake when you're a young player, you're a freshman or sophomore, because the other piece to that we sometimes forget, especially at the quarterback position, is, if I throw 2 interceptions, am I going to be out? Someone's always looking over my shoulder. You got the crowd. Everyone's like, oh, put so-and-so in or whatever. And you've got social media. You got all these other things that are going on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point and I think, you say, the last play doesn't, affect the next play. And that's something, we always say is short-term memory. But an important piece of that is if you go and throw an interception, yeah, you can say that, the last play doesn't affect the next play. And it might tell you that, they're not going to run the same defense, blah, blah, blah. But if you do not feel as if you were prepared for those moments, then the last play will in fact affect the next play. Because, if you're feeling like, oh, I threw that because I'm not prepared, well, the next time you get the ball on the next drive, how much more prepared are you then? And then you begin to second guess yourself. And I think that's a troubling thing is, getting to those points and then letting the doubt creep in. But I think it's really important to, make sure that they believe in the fact that, all right, you're prepared for this moment.
Question about that with the throwing the interceptions. Did you have a mistake ritual that you kind of practice? Like Russell Wilson talks about, at the end of each play, he visualizes a reset button and he just hits the reset button and it all starts over again. So did you have something specific that you had practiced before the games? Like, I threw an interception, here's how I reset myself.
No, I didn't have something that was, kind of built into me like that. Now, I was lucky enough that my freshman year of high school, I worked with a quarterback coach, Dave Baker, who's a really close friend of mine. And he was just always on me about short-term memory. Whether you do something great, whether you do something bad, just forget about it the next play. And I swear it has given me like memory loss, because I will talk to people and they would talk about like some certain play or this and that. And I'm like, I don't even remember it, honestly. And they're like, how can you forget that? I'm like, I remember, I think most of them, but like, I don't know. I was just so in tune to, what's coming next. Like, all right, I threw the ball. He caught it. It's a first down. All right. Like what's my next thought here? Where do we go? And, I don't know, that is something like I thought that, it always helped me was, I wasn't going to get tied up in, anything that just happened, whether it was great, whether it wasn't. I'll watch the highlights later. Like, I don't really care.
Yeah. How do you I think that's a really smart approach. How do you help now these young quarterbacks and even some of the established quarterbacks deal with what we just talked about a little bit ago there, as far as the social media influence, the fans, all, dealing with, I mean, like you said earlier, they're getting, the not enough of the credit and probably too much of the blame a lot of times, but how do you help them navigate that?
I think it goes for more than just athletes nowadays for when it comes to social media. Too much of it just isn't good for you. It's giving you, false expectations of life, and, everyone on social media is happy. It's not like that in real life. You don't post your sad stuff on social media. But for me as a player, I deleted mine during the week. I didn't want to hear how good we were going to be this week, or what we were going to beat a team by, or, how good the other team we were playing is. And I just felt that, those things could just distract me from, seeing what I actually wanted to see. Someone might write that, this defensive end or this corner is really good. And, I don't know who that writer is. I've never met him before. Maybe I have, I don't know, but he's not in my inner circle. He's not a coach of mine. So those things don't matter to me. If it's someone's opinion I truly value, that would be fine. But all the people whose opinions I truly value are in the room with me. They're in the trenches working with me every day. So those are the things you have to focus on. And, I was lucky. I never got too many mean tweets or anything like that. But the thing I would say is, don't take it for more than it's worth.
Yeah.
Some guy's sitting on his house right now, or sitting on his couch right now, and typing this into his Twitter. And for some reason, he does not realize how ridiculous he looks doing it. Because that's how it goes. I mean, most of the times the sports writers and stuff are pretty good to the athletes. They most of the time don't tear them down too bad. It's the guys sitting on the couch that never play. They'll really rip somebody. And so I honestly tell our guys, don't even bother looking at it.
Yeah.
The mean tweets will be funny to read in a couple of years. I've got some buddies who played elsewhere who've got some pretty good ones. So they can laugh at them now.
Some of the best advice I ever got about that, Bryan, was I don't remember if it was a coach or someone said to me one time that you will always worry about what other people think of you until you finally realize how little they do. And I always thought that was so true. It's like, people worry about it all the time, but at the end of the day, everyone's just at their own level of insecurity, and they're all operating in the same fishbowl. It's just a matter of recognizing that nobody's perfect, and you're going to deal with it. So talk to me a little bit about that piece of it, as far as the speed, so in baseball, that's the background I come from. In baseball, we talk about the dirt theory all the time, is that, between when you're sitting in the stands at a baseball game, the game seems like it's going really, really slow. When you move to the dugouts, it picks up pace a little bit more. When you're in the coach's boxes, it's a little bit faster. But when you're between those white lines, the game is going really, really quick. I imagine football is very similar to that, where, it's real easy in the stands to be like, oh, he's open, or something like that. And then when you move into you're up in the coach's box, same thing. But then when you get in the sidelines, it's a little bit, pace picks up a little bit quicker. How have you helped those players navigate just the speed of the game? Does that all come back to preparation like you were talking about earlier? Or what's been the big thing when you're working with those young quarterbacks around, just the speed of the game in general?
So one thing we do is, kind of to help our guys is teach them what are indicators. For a quarterback, a lot of the game is done pre-snap and then shortly after the snap of the ball. And, defenses will try to confuse young quarterbacks and, even old quarterbacks and try and give them a bunch of different looks. But as soon as the ball is snapped, there are a certain number of things that happen that pretty much tell you where everyone on the defense is going to go. And I don't want to give all of them away because, I don't want any guys
right.
ever listen to this to have any idea. But, one easy one is the safeties. Where the safeties go is probably going to tell you most of the time, what coverage they're in and what things you need to know as a quarterback. And so I think one way that we, help guys play fast is we give them rules. So we give them rules to play within the framework of the game. And, these are helpful because, you would think that, all right, if we give you so many rules, then, guys are going to have to, listen to every rule and then, think about that every single time they go. But the way we do it is we give them a set number of rules for different plays. And those are things that allow them to play faster. So, one of them is, all right, if this guy rotates here, then we're going to work, these two patterns. If he rotates the other way, we're going to work these three patterns. And, it really helps them because, they catch the ball, free safety moves a certain way. Then they know, all right, I'm working these three routes. What's my next thing here? Who's getting open here? And in a ways that's, simpler terms, but it really helps guys to have a framework and then, kind of put little rules in there to help them play faster. So they don't have to worry about, oh, well, this guy's standing here and, this guy's disguising here. And, when you're looking at everything, you're kind of looking at nothing.
Right.
When you look at the certain things that are important to you, those few things will kind of tell you the rest of the picture that you need to know.
That's what I love about that too, from a mental performance standpoint, is the fact that, the mind doesn't focus on two things at the same time. So when you're giving them those cues, those focus cues, it now takes all of their focus, right? So they can't be in a red light situation, emotionally or with their thoughts and feelings. So it's really important that they're dialed into one thing. But now the key is for you guys as coaches to recognize when they're not picking up those cues is probably a good indicator to you. Hey, their mind is somewhere else. They're not dialed into this play. They're not focused on what's going on. So it's being able to recognize that as well, which is a good thing. That kind of makes me think about, this, when I was just talking about being dialed in from an emotional standpoint, we've talked a lot the last couple of shows about this difference between mental toughness and resilience. A lot of times coaches will say to their players, hey, we want you to be more mentally tough. We want you to, now as players, what they hear is we want you to put your feelings aside. We want you to put those emotions aside, suck it up, so to speak, or whatever. But really what we find, especially in the sports psychology realm of things, is that that's not necessarily a good thing. We need to acknowledge that the emotion's there. We need to acknowledge that anxiety is there because it's a pressure-packed situation, but it's dealing with it, setting it to the side, and still allowing yourself to be focused on it. So is that something that you guys, do you have people who are working with you all on any of that stuff? Is that something you guys try to unpack for the players too, as far as accepting some of these emotions, but just being able to channel them and deal with them in a more positive way?
I think it's something that, is becoming more popular, just in the NCAA and in college football. And, my thought is that, it's heading towards that. Because you're right. In a lot of ways, we, coach players to be resilient, which, anything that happens, you can overcome it. You can overcome it. And, the health piece of that isn't probably talked about as much, as it should. And, I think just beginning to have those conversations is something that's, made a huge impact on just mental health in, college athletics. Is, they didn't talk about it much when I was in college, but now we're talking about it. And, things that get said is, well, yeah, like how do we help with that? And so I think there's, going to be a learning curve in the next, couple of years with, how do we, yes, we realize it's an issue in college athletics, but how do we, fix that issue or help that issue? And I agree with you. One of the things I think is that you don't go through it obliviously, or I guess you don't neglect those feelings. Just because you're overcoming something doesn't mean that you have to be in denial about the fact that it exists. Mm-hmm. Your pressure, your anxiety, or, even your, depression, those are all real feelings. And, those are things that you can address are there. And in a way, I guess I kind of equate it to, when players are, getting ready for a game and guys are like, yeah, I'm nervous and guys are you nervous? And they're like, no, I'm not nervous. Mm-hmm. And you can tell, like, well, what do you mean you're not nervous? You've been, rocking back and forth in your locker for the last 35 minutes and you won't talk to anybody. Like, what, you're not nervous? Like, buddy, that's what nervous is. Yeah. The fact that you're thinking about every single possible, scenario that can happen. Like, hey, you're nervous. And I think that, those things actually, I think it helps you overcome them is when you acknowledge that they're there versus like, oh, like, the famous, all time one is, are you afraid of failure? And the people that say like, no, I'm not afraid of failure. Well, then like, why do you care at all? Like, if you're not afraid to fail, right, like, where do you get your motivation from? Yeah. And I think there's, the good way that I've, overcome it. And the thing that I try and tell our players is, it's not the fear of failure. Like, think about the fact that if you fail, what are the things that, can lead to you failing, or, what does failing look like? Yeah, we lose this game. I throw 3 interceptions. Like, oh man, that would really suck. But is it that bad? Is it really that bad? Out of all the things, the way your life can turn, all of the bad things that could happen to you, is throwing 3 interceptions and losing a college football game that bad? Right. No, like, no one's going to remember this in 4 years. Like, don't worry about it. And so I think that's one thing, is that acknowledging like the fear of failure versus just like you failing and things not being good, but just acknowledging the fact that it's just fear. It's just your thoughts of how bad it's going to be are way worse than the actual, outcome if that thing happens to you.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, it's what's FAIL, the acronym for first attempt in learning. And it's one of those things that, I heard we had a guest on our show who worked really heavily with Ohio State way back when Urban was still there. Brian Kite's his name. And Brian talked about this idea of, what people, that fear of failure really is, if you break it down, is it's a fear of staying right where you are. Because if you're afraid of trying to progress or trying to move forward, then you don't want to attempt this, and you're afraid that you're going to fail. And so as that fear allows you to stay static, then you're really saying is, I'm afraid of staying right where I am. And that, and I also think, Brian, that and you probably deal with this a lot as a coach, there's also the other side of this is a fear of success. Because what happens when people are afraid of success is they're afraid that if I'm more successful, or if I do start achieving these higher things, then what's going to happen is people are going to expect more out of me. And sometimes people don't like that, So that's something I don't know.
I feel with that one. Yeah, that's a real one for sure. It's, in my opinion, it's easier to be the underdog than it is to be, LeBron James. For me, it's easier to be, and people are going to hate me for saying this, but it's easier for me to be, for someone to be Michael Jordan than it is to be LeBron James. And meaning that, Michael Jordan, the old thing, he got cut from his team and then he went on and became the best basketball player of all time. Whereas LeBron, everybody thought LeBron was going to be the best player when he was like 13 years old.
Right.
And then he went and, became that. And, I think it's really hard to exceed expectations, especially when they're set really high. And I think it's, it doesn't take, much to, over or exceed expectations that are set really low. And, if you set those expectations yourself really low, like you're not going to be happy when you, exceed them. But I think one thing with, expectations and pressure is acknowledging that it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
If no one expected anything from you and you felt no pressure, well, then like, wow,
right.
You're probably not going to be in, a good spot most of the time. So I'd say like to invite it if you're those people or if you're that person, that situation, and just to remember that, people are great in moments and people are extraordinary in moments, but all that is just being consistently good at what you're doing. Something that Donna Kirkpatrick always says that I love is being great is just being consistently good. So you don't have to do anything extraordinary. You just have to do, the basic, simple things that you're asked of and just do them over and over again.
Do simple better. Do simple better. I mean, it's so true. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of times it's hard to get players to kind of to understand that is, because they've been told so much like, oh, it's you either have it or don't. It's a growth mindset too. You can get into a little bit of that as far as just, continuing to work and develop. Sean, you had something you were going to say?
There was a few things that came up. We were talking about the NCAA getting better with teaching athletes to understand that it's okay to have these thoughts. Now, football traditionally is not in that mindset. It's kind of like, no, work through it. You're tough. That's it. Rub some dirt on it. You're fine. Do you have your players work on any strategies like mindfulness or little meditations, or does anybody from, well, I don't want to say the psychology department come in, because a lot of times when people hear psychologists, they think they're there to fix something, where mental performance coaches kind of get by with, we're just trying to get your brain better, instead of trying to fix anything. So do you see the NCAA or your schools in particular bringing people in to help with it?
I think in the future, I see that happening. Me, personally, I wish that the NCAA just kind of like mandated it, like, oh, you have to have this on staff. That way it just made it easy for everybody. I am someone who uses meditation. I didn't always use it. I probably just started using it about 6 or 7 months ago. And, one thing I realized is that when I start my day with meditation or when I meditate during a day, I seem to feel better at the end of the day. And I think, for anyone that's interested in starting it, you can't do it one day and just like immediately, expect results. It's something that you just have to, commit to trying. And then you kind of feel when you need it. Another thing with meditation is people say that, always attack it as if it's your first time ever doing it. And, for me, it's been helpful. I feel that I, think clearly after doing it, and, I feel less stressed while doing it. With our players, it's something that, I encourage. But it's one of those things that you can't demand someone to meditate all the time, because then it becomes a chore, and that's not what meditation is supposed to be.
Yeah. It just dawned on me, Bryan, that this was your first year down there, right? Coaching, or did you help out a little bit last year?
So I've been here like a year and a half.
Okay. I was just thinking about like your basic first experience in that coaching role has been managing the pandemic, right? I mean, it's like, you talk about these moments where players are at this, whirlwind of emotions and anxiety and not knowing week to week whether you're even going to have a game. That's got to be challenging for you guys to navigate as a coaching staff as well, because getting people ready to play, but then, we don't know, we might not be having a game. So yeah, that I'm sure that was an experience for you.
Yeah, it was brutal. From my point of view, I'm happy that I got into it the year of, the pandemic, just because, it's all uphill from here. If you can get through this year, then,
that's
you
right.
feel pretty good.
Yeah.
When you're delivering meals to quarantine kids in the dorms, carrying 20 meals to people, and you're like, damn, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be rough. But, we did deal with that a good amount. We had our, quarterback pop on what we thought was a false positive test. And, we had to prepare a true freshman to play this past year. And, in those moments though, and, I'm still young at this, so we'll see if I change in the future. But I do think that you just stick to what you believe in. Our freshman, what I told him is, we're going to come in after practice every day this week, and we're going to prepare, for this moment. And I showed him the Kobe Bryant clip of, confidence comes from the preparation. I kind of like instilled that in him. It's like, look, you will feel confident out there because of the work that we put in now. I was like, if you slack off and you don't come to do these things, and then that you could have worked harder, like that's when the doubt will set in inside your head.
Yeah.
And, you'll play so much better, even if you're not more talented. And even if you don't have as good of players, if you just believe that you've outworked the other people on the other side of the field, like you'll play closer to your potential than if you don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, with COVID, and I'm a high school teacher, so my entire career flipped all over the place this year. Did you find that you were able to use things like visualization more with the athletes because you couldn't get them on the field, or was that something you guys didn't really try? Because if you think it, and you said a lot about belief. If you believe that you've put more work in than everyone else on the field, have you guys ever tried visualization with your athletes?
It's not something that we've really addressed. One thing I've said to them is, as a quarterback, you have different plays, and however the defense lines up and the way they move, you make your decisions off of those plays. And, one thing we've given them like a script of plays and different things. We'll give them the game plan, and we tell them like, hey, take some time and just think through these in your head and think through, all right, I've got this play on right now. I know this guy's running it out. If, I see where the corner is and see where the safety is, and, they roll to a cover 3 look, I know I can throw the out as long as the wheel doesn't expand outside of it. If the wheel expands outside of it, then I know I'm going to think to the drag, and then, so on and so on. And, that's the visualization I'm thinking of. I don't know if it's, different from what you are. But it just kind of like puts players in those moments more inside of their head before they ever get to that actual moment.
That's exactly it. The mental reps and seeing what's going to happen and seeing that defender coming up and moving. That's exactly what I was talking about.
Slows the game down for you for sure. Anything surprise you in your first year and a half? I mean, anything that you didn't expect, or maybe you expected, but it was even at a higher degree than you thought it was going to be?
I think probably, just teaching in itself. It's funny. I never thought of myself as a teacher, growing up and becoming a teacher, but I kind of always thought of myself, maybe one day being a coach. And one thing I've realized now is, well, they're the same damn thing. I don't know why I thought I wasn't, wasn't what I was going to be. Yeah. And I think, the challenging part is that, I can sit here and I can know all these things, or I can look at the defense and know all these things, but none of those things matter. The only thing that matters is if I can get our players to understand that. And I think, over the last year, I've kind of developed more of, how can I teach things in ways that, will get our players on board. And one thing you realize is, people learn different ways. There's different types of learners, and, who needs what. And I think over the last year, I've been able to definitely improve on that. And I think it's going pretty well.
Awesome. Well, you'll find you just continue to meet them where they are, and you're doing a great job with it, I'm sure, as you have with everything you've conquered and attacked in life. And I think they got the right one down there helping them out there at East Carolina. We really appreciate you joining us tonight and talking to us, sharing some of the things that you've learned along the way and how you're helping to shape the next generation of players coming through. One of the things that Trey Sharp had said about you was, he said, my locker was beside his, and I always admired how level-headed he stayed, whether things were going good or bad. And I think that's the key. And I think that's something that goes beyond sports and into life, is just, we've seen in this last year, there's a lot of things that can happen that aren't in our plans, but it's how we respond, how we deal with it, how we stay steady throughout that, that's going to help us out. And that's what you're going to find too, is what you're doing now as a coach. And this is coming from somebody who's been a coach for over 25 years, is nothing compared to the feelings you're going to get 20 years from now when you see all of these athletes coming back with their families and their, just you've seen them grown up, and you see what kind of contributors they are to the community and stuff like that, because that's really what it's all about, is just shaping those young men into becoming better individuals and contributors in society. And I know you guys do a great job of that down there at East Carolina. Sean, something?
And Bryan, as a school teacher, I'm going to tell you this: you have the greatest quality to be an excellent teacher, because you like to learn.
Yeah.
The more you keep learning, the better teacher you will be. So you got the first step down.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck to you, Bryan. We really appreciate it. Tell everybody we said hello, Coach Houston and everyone, and we thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, will do. Thank you guys for having me.
Good luck.
Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.